we are not through with the collapse of the economy and the collapse of the stock market. I think we've got a dead cat bounce going on right now because sentiment got so negative. But I would be extremely leery of the stock market come September or October. The economy in the United States is on the verge of falling off a cliff, and the government is doing things that's very foolish and making things worse.
Here at Liberty and Finance, we're licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. We are standing by the inventory, ready to make sure you get what you need, even into the wee hours of night and on weekends, because preparedness doesn't stop. Call us 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty and Finance. And back with us today is our good friend Bob Moriarty, financial author, Marine, and Naval Aviator. Bob, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's pleasure, even if it's a bit hot.
Definitely. How hot is it right now in France?
And where I am, it's 97 Fahrenheit.
That's nothing compared to Arizona. It's obviously actually a mild August right now. I think we haven't gotten above 100 that much, but typically it's 115 here. But it's great to hear that you're staying warm over in France. And we'd like to first discuss the heat that Europe is experiencing right now and how it might disrupt actually the energy system there. Can you expand on what kind of impact that is having?
Europe, of course, the entire world goes through periods of drought and high temperatures. And they've got something in Europe that's quite interesting. They call them hunger stones. And these are stones in the river that people have carved inscriptions in when the water level got so low. And they're called hunger stones because they mark desperately low river levels that would forecast famines. Obviously, Europe in general has an energy issue right now with less coal and natural gas and fuel coming from Russia. But in both Italy and Germany, rivers are drying up and they can't move coal and they can't move grain. And this could be catastrophic for the European economy. Literally, as of today, they can't move barges on the Rhine River, which is the main waterway in Germany. And of course, Germany is very dependent on Russian natural gas. So there could be a catastrophic situation in Europe very soon. And there are rivers in the UK, the same thing is true of.
You're saying a catastrophic situation for Europe with the economy, with water, with energy. Can you expand on what this might look like?
Well, I sent you another link. There are businesses in the United States that are starting to shut down. One of the most energy-intensive businesses in the world is the production of aluminum. Aluminum is a very common mineral, but it takes a lot of electricity to actually smelt. And they're having to shut these plants down because the cost of electricity has tripled and quadrupled. The cost of natural gas and the cost of heating oil in Europe has increased 1,000% in the last year. It's estimated in the UK that a third of people are going to have energy bills above £5,000 a year. And there's actually a group being formed, and they're going to have a price boycott. They're going to refuse to pay for fuel. So there's a lot of dangerous things going on in the world, some of which we can control, but some of which are out of control. I wish someone in the United States or NATO in Europe would realize that the continuing war in Ukraine is devastating for the world. And the United States has taken exactly the opposite position. The United States wants to take on China and Russia at the same time. And we just spent $2.3 trillion in 20 years in Afghanistan fighting groups of Taliban, no bigger than a big Girl Scout troop, and we got beat. So there's crazy things going on.
So this is definitely going to impact the price of everything in Europe and also in the United States. It seems like, at least here in the U.S., I'm looking at the gas prices. They're slowly, going back to somewhat normal. They're just over $4 at the moment. They were up, almost to $6 earlier this summer. But your take on that, it seems like, the stock market is rising right now. Maybe people are getting a little bit of relief from inflation. But where are things headed from here? It seems like this might be some false hope that people have right now.
I think that's a very good way of putting it. We are not through with the collapse of the economy and the collapse of the stock market. I think we've got a dead cat bounce going on right now because sentiment got so negative. But I would be extremely leery of the stock market come September or October. The economy in the United States is on the verge of falling off a cliff, and the government is doing things that's very foolish and making things worse. The same thing, of course, is true in Europe. Everyone now recognizes that sanctions were a mistake. But the one thing you don't hear anybody talking about is, why don't we drop the sanctions? If they don't hurt Russia, but they do hurt us, why don't we drop the sanctions? And I'm sitting here saying, are these people crazy? That's too easy to do. If you shoot yourself in the right foot, why would you turn around and shoot yourself in the left foot?
I think that's a very good point. And we've talked about before, how really the sanctions have only helped Russia and hurt everybody else. Moving forward from here, you're saying that we could be headed towards, a greater crash. We've talked about this before, for example, for the stock market and the economy. But you're saying right now it really is just a dead cat bounce, and really we should not get our hopes up for, making new highs or anything like that.
That's my opinion. I don't see anything that makes the general stock market a buy. If you look at the price of commodities have tumbled, which is good for producers and consumers, but it's bad for the general stock market. We're in a very precarious situation. One of the things that I sent to you was a document talking about Ukraine using American rocket systems to attack the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. And if they hit the power plant, and if there is a release of radioactivity, that is absolutely an act of war, and it's a red line we don't want to cross. And that literally could happen today. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen next week. The Russians have gone to the UN and said, you need to come investigate this right now. And of course, the American media, which lies about everything, says that the Russians have attacked the power plant themselves. But Russia is the one that would suffer the most from radioactive release. So it doesn't make any sense that Russia would attack it. They have found proof of American weapons being used. I think that's just the worst of bad ideas, is the United States handing weapons to Ukraine. Ukraine lost the war the first week. As soon as they lost control of the air, the war was over. The only question was, how many Ukrainians is Zelensky willing to let die before he admits there's no way they could possibly win? It's a senseless war. It's a war the United States encouraged in the first place. It's a war the United States is still encouraging. When you've walked into 25 bars and run your mouth and gotten your ass kicked 25 times, it's a really bad idea to walk into the 26th bar.
And you don't see any relief from this conflict. I mean, it doesn't seem like the U.S. is looking to release the sanctions or anything like that. It's going to continue to be a negative outcome for the U.S.
It's a negative outcome for everyone. On March 1st, I wrote a piece, and I think I was the very first person in the world to use the term, and said that the United States, the EU, and NATO were committing suicide with sanctions. Many people are using the term now, and everyone recognizes that it's bad for the United States and it's bad for the EU, and nobody's saying, why don't we take the sanctions off? It's no big deal to make a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes in life. But when you keep making the same mistake again and again and again, God's trying to tell you something.
And it seems like what we're seeing right now, as we mentioned at the top of this interview, is this we're seeing a lot of things coming together at the same time. So we're seeing the energy shortage, the commodity shortage, all these shortages because of the Russia-Ukraine war, but also because of other issues. For example, the European heat wave and also the drought right now in Europe. Your perspective on that, how can we prepare for these kinds of shortages going forward? Are there going to be power outages? How do we prepare for that? And also the food shortages we might see.
Well, I'm not sure that you and I have actually discussed it, but do you realize that you personally are at ground zero? There is a terrible drought in the Southwest, and Lake Mead and Lake Powell are drying up, and that supplies energy to 40 million people in the Southwest and water, and that's catastrophic. And I'll be candid, there are some issues there is no solution to. And that's a horrible thing to say, but it's true. If you live in Arizona and the Colorado River dries up because of a combination of a drought and poor water management, what do you do? And the answer is your choices are really severely limited. That could be catastrophic. I mean, we know that Europe has a catastrophic situation, but we've got 40 million Americans in the Southwest who are pretty much oblivious to it. So let's talk about two things. There are things that you can control, and there are things that you can't control. I've got 97-degree temperature here today. I got the windows open. I took a shower. I cooled down a little bit. I can do something about that, but I can't do anything about the temperature. Okay. Likewise, if there's a drought in Germany or there's a drought in the Southwest United States, there really is no particular cure for that. You just have to make it through. But the things that we can control, okay, the United States economy has headed right off an absolute cliff. And I'm seeing things. You raised a really good point. There are so many black swans flying around right now that the danger is the black swans run into each other and make things worse. And I think that's a fairly simple concept. We have some really serious problems now. The thing with the FBI and going after Trump, that's very dangerous. One of the things that a lot of people have missed, at the same time they did that, the FBI seized the phone of its sitting congressman. We're seeing politics drag the FBI and the DOJ into the fight. And that's an extremely dangerous situation. I'm not advocating revolution, but I'm saying that's exactly how revolutions start. We are going to see continuing inflation in the United States. We're going to see continuing shortages of food. We're doing some things in California. I don't know if they do it where you are. Have you read or have you heard about the drugstores locking things down? So if you want to buy something, you have to go to one of the clerks. It's gotten so bad in California, they're locking up the toothbrushes.
Well, they were locking up baby formula at the grocery store where I live.
Yeah, okay, really good example. I cannot even imagine the United States, richest country in the world. How the hell did they run out of baby food? I mean, was there some kind of shortage of babies they didn't know about? So there are a lot of very dangerous things. Here's what not to do. You absolutely do not want to take on debt. You don't want to take on any kind of margin position into anything, gold stocks, silver stocks, diamond stocks, cars, anything. This is not a time to be taking financial risks. This is time to hunker down and try to make it through it. In a depression, every single financial asset gets hit. And you're just hoping you get hit the least. Nobody's smart enough to make money in every single investment, but you can be smart enough to keep your risks down to the point where you're not going to get wiped out. This is not a time to be investing in the cryptocurrencies. It's not a time to be investing in the bond market. It's a very dangerous time. And quite bluntly, I think, and a lot of people are waking up to this, there are two classes of assets. There's paper assets and there's real assets. We've had 40 years where paper assets went up and up and up and up because of the action of Federal Reserve. And I think that period of time has ended. And we're going to have 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years of paper assets decreasing in value, but real assets increasing in relative value.
I think one of the things that you mentioned is really important to reduce risk, because people call us all the time looking to, purchase metals, and they're like, well, what do I do in a worst case scenario? And the answer that I often give is like, no one knows what the future is going to hold. The only thing we can do is reduce risk, be diversified as much as possible, and have as many plans as we can. But it's like at the end of the day, we have to expect the unexpected, as they say.
That's a very good way of putting it. We're in dangerous times. This is not a time to keep your head in the sand. It's a time to make yourself aware, to read, to listen, and pay attention to the very few people who actually tell the truth. We've gone through 2 years of the most incredible, I don't know what to say. I can't say too much, of course, or it'll get bounced off YouTube. But we've gone through 2 years where we've been lied to about everything. We're in a period of probably the maximum insanity I've ever heard. We could be a day or two away from a catastrophic nuclear war, and there's very few people saying, hey, that would be a really bad idea. Well, I'll tell you right now, a nuclear war would be a really bad idea. So taking on Russia, taking on China, being the most aggressive nation in world history is a really bad idea.
When we look at this, then obviously expecting the unexpected, what are your thoughts also on having like a plan B, I guess? Because obviously we can prepare a lot at our own residence, right? But do you ever think of, if times here get tough in your local place, going somewhere else?
Here's the deal. If you're an adult, and if you have assets, and if you have some sense, you do not need to have a plan B. You need to have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, a plan E, and a plan F. The only thing that I can say is you cannot predict what's going to happen next week. Okay, that's how bad it is right now. So this idea that the past is going to be a straight line from what, or I'm sorry, the future is a straight line from the past. That's absolutely not true. So what I did, what Barbara and I did, is we reduced the risk as much as we could because we recognized energy might be a problem. We recognized that food might be a problem. We recognize that illegal immigration might be a problem. We recognize that crime might be a problem. We recognize that gold and silver might go down. Okay, we recognize the stock market and the bond market would go down. So we moved to a place that's secure. There's very little crime. We can raise our own food if we have to. I mean, I'll tell you a funny story. Have I talked to you about my chickens? I got chickens. Okay, now I can tell you all about screwing up how to raise chickens. It took me about 6 months to figure out how to do it. But I've got 19 chicks downstairs right now, and I have the ability to raise chickens. And it's funny because I've got a really nice neighbor next door, and she started raising chickens. But of course, she's French. She knows how to do it. And I finally got a rooster. So my girls were happy, and they were producing a couple of eggs a day, which is great. And then the rooster saw the girls next door, so he went over and introduced him, and they thought, this guy's really cute, okay? One of the things you can do, you get chickens, we live in the area where there's plenty of grain. It's relatively cool. It never gets too hot, never gets too cold. We could raise our own food, and chickens are great. Because if they produce, you get eggs, and if they don't produce, you have KFC.
No, that's fantastic, and I think having that alternative source of food is also very good. You kind of called me out living in Arizona. It's not obviously the best place for water, and very insecure in that case. I know. Is it under your house that you have a stream going? That sounds pretty cool. Can you tell us a bit about like your water supply in that sense?
Well, that's a really good point. And a lot of the things that I've done really by accident more than anything else. You never got to meet Barbara. My wife was a chatty Cathy, and she loved people, and she loved interacting with people. And the unfortunate thing about that is when I sat down and started trying to focus to write, she would start asking me questions. And I realized this isn't going to work. And somebody told me about a former mill house that was for sale. It's a tiny little thing, but it's room enough for me. So I bought this, and the purpose was to have an escape from Barbara that I could write without somebody bugging me. And I told her, I love you dearly. I just can't chat with you and write at the same time. But this was a grain mill for both corn and wheat. And I've still got the grindstones outside. And of course, it used water power and a wheel, okay, to turn the grindstones. So the beauty is I have fresh, safe water 12 months a year. I'm putting in a run-of-river generator so I can use the same water power that used to turn the wheels. I can use the water power to generate electricity. We're in the country. Everybody knows everybody. And quite bluntly, it's a terrible way to put it. Everybody sticks their nose in your business. And actually, sometimes that's a really nice thing, because if something happens, they're looking out for you. And I have the most wonderful neighbors here. And the beauty of the government in France is it's no more screwed up than anybody else, but of course it's no less screwed up than anybody else. But they've got a good healthcare system here. The food is excellent. The climate's wonderful. you happen to be in a very dangerous area. Now, what city are you in?
Yeah, the general Phoenix area. So very hot, very dry.
Okay, I'll tell you a story. When I was 10 years old, my parents lived in Phoenix. Of course, I lived there. And I went to Madison number 2. And you're too young to remember this. There used to be 6 elementary schools in Phoenix. And they were not very original in Phoenix. So you had Madison number 1, Madison number 2, Madison number 3, Madison number 4, 5, and 6. We had neighbors right behind us who raised chickens. So, of course, I'm going back to 1956, and Phoenix was very rural back then. Since then, they put a freeway literally right next to the house that I used to live in when I was 10 years old. And Madison number 2 has been renamed to something else, and it's now an administrative system or administrative school for the school system. But Phoenix used to be a country town, and I'm astounded at how big it is now. And it's very scary because you are absolutely 100% dependent on the Colorado River, and the Colorado River is drying up.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up some very good points, and for anybody like myself living in the desert, we have to really think about, is this the best place for preparedness? You mentioned also having community is so important, and that people should have a plan A, B, C, D, E, and F. And I think community is also one way to do that, because as you mentioned, your friends might have different resources than you do. So can you expand on the community aspect and really how to build that?
I can't tell you how to build it, but what I can say is how important it is. When Barbara and I were living in Miami, and we lived there for about 15 years, we lived in an apartment complex, and believe it or not, we never introduced ourselves to our next door neighbor. And that's how Americans live now, totally independent. People in the United States used to be community-oriented, and they've lost much of that. Now, if you go to Idaho or Wyoming or Montana or Eastern Oregon or Eastern Washington, they still have a lot of that. There is some sense of community in the Southwest and the Northwest. But if you go to the East, there's no sense of community at all. Dmitry Orlov has suggested that he believes the economic catastrophe that he sees coming to the United States will split the United States up into 5 or 6 nations. And I think there's a good chance that could be true. I personally, and it's just me, I'm not saying that other people should do it, I personally would be exceptionally nervous about relying on the water coming out of the Colorado River, because there's 2 parts to the problem. One is the drought, okay? But droughts happen, and there's not very much you can do. But when they split the water from the Colorado River going back 120 years, it was a very wet period of time. And basically what the government's involved in, this is California and Oregon and Arizona and New Mexico, Nevada, what the government's involved all did is they split up 120% of the water. So there's been this problem that's been coming for years and years and years, that there was an overallocation of water, and now it's here in combination with the worst drought in 700 or 800 years. So people should pay attention to that. It could get catastrophic. If Lake Mead and Lake Powell dry up, and they're pretty close to it now, what are you going to do? You don't want to be the last guy of the 40 million to think about moving someplace else.
Definitely. And I think water is such a key issue. You know, you can survive maybe a couple weeks without food, but you can only survive a couple days without water. So I think having a plan is so important, and having maybe, as you mentioned, the A, B, C, D, E, and F plans for water is so important in these times. But Bob, we really appreciate your time today. Before we let you go, did you want to share with the viewers where they can find you online? And we'll also put your Amazon author page in the description of this video. And any last preparedness thoughts that you have for our viewers?
Okay, and we really haven't talked very much about precious metals or resource stocks, but I've written 2 very good investment books that are about $10 a piece. And if you read the reviews, you realize that there's a lot of people who have read the books and gotten a lot out of them. Now, I actually gave away the rights to the books to some friends of mine, so I don't make a penny out of it. So I'm not talking my own book. But we are going to go into a period where resources of all kinds are going to be the only safe investment. There's been a giant shift that nobody recognizes. We're going to get away from the debt-based financial system of the West, and we're going to go to a resource-based financial system that's being created by the Chinese and the Russians right now. Now, there's going to be a lot of chaos as that happens. There's $300 trillion in debt in the world, and everybody that passed Economics 101 recognized that money simply cannot be paid back. So a lot of people are going to lose their pensions, they're going to lose their savings, the value of real estate's going to plummet. There are bad times coming, and this is a good time to think about who do you know who lives somewhere that is safe, who lives somewhere where there is water. What could you do if the worst case situation happens? This is a really good time that there's 2 classes of people, the people who prepare and the people who don't prepare. And the people who don't prepare are basically screwed.
All right. Well, Bob Moriarty, it's definitely a wake-up call for all of us, but thank you so much for joining us today. Like I said, and I guess just also for our viewers, definitely check out Bob's Amazon author page we'll have in the description of this video. Please check it out. Fantastic books there. Bob, thank you so much for your time, and God bless.
Thank you.
Miles Franklin Precious Metals is one of America's oldest and most trusted bullion dealers. Miles Franklin is A+ rated and accredited by the Better Business Bureau, licensed and bonded, and has 0 complaints ever registered. Here at Liberty and Finance, we are licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. To order, simply call us, discuss your needs, and we will let you know our live inventory, prices, and availability, and lock in your order over the phone. Once your order is locked, the price is held for you regardless of market fluctuations, and the metals are reserved for you awaiting your settled payment. Within 1 business day of ordering, you will receive an email invoice detailing the order and payment instructions. Miles Franklin accepts payments by bank wire, ACH or electronic check, money order, check mailed priority mail, and cryptocurrency. The fastest forms of payment are bank wire and cryptocurrency. Upon settled payment, metals will ship out within 3 to 5 business days. You will receive tracking information via email. Domestic shipping charges are $15 for any order under 500 ounces of silver or 10 ounces of gold. For orders larger than that, domestic shipping is free. The package will be double boxed, fully insured, and labeled discreetly, with no indication of the contents inside. For your privacy, the name Miles Franklin will not even be on the package. To talk to myself, Elijah, my brother Kaiser, or my father Dunnigan, call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.